I'm not much of a historical war gamer. I prefer fiction to nonfiction, but a little game called Konflict 47 has definitely caught my eye. It's got elements of history, but then you throw a little bit of mechs in there, maybe a little magic, some repulsor lift technology. I can get my flams a-flimmin'. Sean has been begging me to get into a historical war game, and this is as close as I'm gonna get. I've got a little baby army of US forces, I've got some Firefly infantry, and I've got a Pawn Skater Scout Walker. I put these models together to kind of feel out the range, see what colors work well, see what techniques work well, and I learned a lot. And now I think I can hit the ground running and actually get a playable force, a Konflict, ready to rock and roll. I only have 6 models almost done now, so I think I'll go ahead and put together the rest of the box. Konflict 47 has been expanding their plastic range, so these guys are all plastic. The way these guys are cut is classic, with separated legs, bodies, arms, and heads. These Firefly airborne infantry are the elite fighting force of the US faction. Equipped with the jump packs, and in their hands what looks like Thompson submachine guns are actually the M1X1 submachine guns, augmented with Rift technology to make them even more powerful than your typical lead thrower. The kits require some mold line scraping, and most of the arms fit better on certain bodies than others, but I want my guys perfect, so I decided to just glue on the arms I wanted however I want, and I'll fix the fit and finish later. This box builds a lot of different units for the game. Firefly infantry, Firefly medics, Firefly forward observers, Firefly artillery forward observers. I'm not exactly sure what I want yet, so I'm just gonna build a bunch of guys with the M1X1 rifles, and a couple guys with flamethrowers and the BAR machine gun. I left the heads off for now, and I need to clean up some of these arms. For some of these, there are some gaps to fill, and to make this happen, I mixed up a batch of milliput. I squished this into their armpits, and I used a ball-ended sculpting tool to push the putty into the seam. Then I took a round cone-shaped tool and I smoothed out the putty to make these seams disappear. Now I've got my Fireflies in the exact poses I want. Now it's time for those jump packs. These are gravity projectors, a somewhat inelegant design that does give the airborne infantry some controllable flight. I mixed up some green stuff and the rest of my milliput together to make greenaput, and I got to work attaching the backpacks, sticking the putty into the hole so that I can have a nice solid connection. I used plenty of super glue to keep these locked in place, and now my flyboys are almost ready for paint. Having put together this kit before, I know the heads are really hard to paint once they're attached to the bodies, so I decided to leave them off for now. I clipped off the sprue with the heads and I cleaned up the mold lines. It'll be much easier to paint these all together in one batch. I also left off their fancy shoulder pads, keeping these attached to the sprue for ease of painting. I got all my men onto some paint handles. I still don't know exactly what to do for the bases, so I'm gonna paint them up separately and I'll figure it out later. I stuck some putty into their neck holes to keep the paint out of there. This way I'll be able to get a solid connection later. Now I've got everything cleaned up and prepped for painting. I'm ready for my second try at the Firefly infantry for Konflict 47. These are your basic troopers for the USA faction, and it's not quite a jetpack, it's an anti-gravity pack. The way that this works is exactly like in Star Wars Battlefront 2, the 2005 Star Wars Battlefront 2, the Dark Troopers. When you hit the jump button, you would rocket up into the air at uncontrollable speeds. You're able to maintain that for a little bit, and then you fall back down to the ground. And that is exactly how these guys do. In Konflict 47, the US faction is made up of a bunch of pretty tough mechs and walkers, backed up by incredibly shrimpy infantry that have some really good movement shenanigans. And now it is time to get these guys all painted up so I can do some of those movement shenanigans. I primed all my boys in white. Then for the base coat, I gave them all a coat of paratrooper tan. This dark tan color will give me my shadows in the recesses. Then for the parts facing the sky, I grabbed a John Blanche color, ivory white. This is a nice warm tan color, and I sprayed this on like a zenithal on the top of each of my infantry. Now I have the base colors down. To give me some contrast, I took pallid bone and gave everybody a nice wet coat. Then once that was dry, I did the dry brushing with white ivory on the shoulders and arms to bring out the details in their clothing. Now I remember really struggling to find a green I really liked for my first batch, so for the second try I reached for another John Blanche color, Midnight Olive. By the way, we sell John Blanche sets on EonsOfBattle.com. I mixed this color with algae green. Speed paint and opaque paints mix well together. It gives the mix the flowiness of speed paint with the coverage of the opaque color. This works great as a one-coat solution for all the armor, their backpacks, the straps and belts, and their little knee pads. I also threw this over their helmets too. The green is now base coated, but now to give it some highlights, I mixed leafy green into my midnight olive to brighten it up without desaturating it, and I gave their jump packs a dry brushing. I felt like the dry brushing wasn't leaving behind as much as I wanted, so I decided to brush on some highlights with a mix of more leafy green to make some of the raised details more punchy. Then to get this color brighter still, I added some space dust to brighten up the green while keeping it saturated, and I gave everything another dry brushing. This time there was enough of a jump in value for the color to show up. Now onto the leather bits. I mixed Noble Skin with Darkwood speed paint and I put this on over their boots, belts, and their gas masks. Also some of their heads just have the soft padding without the helmet on top. Then for their guns, I took pure Noble Skin and I painted this on. This is my favorite color for guns. It always makes them look really good with very little effort. The stocks of their submachine guns got a coat of pure Darkwood speed paint. A weird detail on these guys is that they wear yellow gloves. I'm not sure if this has historical significance, but it's kinda cool, so I decided to include it on my troopers. I set aside the flock for a bit to work on their heads. For their goggles and lenses, I took some Arctic Gem and I base coated them, and then took some Raging Sea, which is a super saturated blue speed paint. I glazed this around the edges of the lenses to darken them. Then I mixed my Arctic Gem with white paint and I started glazing this in the middle of each pair of lenses, to make them brighter and brighter until the front of the lenses were pure white and the back of the lenses were dark blue. I painted the rim of the goggles with some gunmetal metallic paints, and I also painted the filters of the gas masks with the same metallic too. A couple of these heads don't have gas masks. I guess these soldiers hold their breath when they drop out of the sky. I painted their faces with some red beige and then washed them with thinned down Goddess Glow speed paint. Then some highlights, mixing space dust into my beige color. Then I had a whole bunch of tiny little faces all done. The blue color gave me some ideas of how to handle the glow effects on the rest of their jump packs and guns. I started out by base coating the glowing coils of their submachine guns with white paint. Then I thinned down the Raging Sea speed paint and I put this over the plasma and over the exposed engines on their backpacks. They also have this little window on top, and this got Raging Sea too. Then I took Arctic Gem and I painted on some little lines running through these windows. Then I came back in with white paint and I did a thinner line right in the middle to make it match the coils on the submachine guns. For the glowing exhaust of the gravity packs, I did some dry brushing of Arctic Gem, then I painted on some highlights of white and I also put these highlights on the guns too. Having all of the same blue colors match makes them all look more uniform. I have so many parts done, but now it's time for their shoulder pads. They're still primed white, so I washed them with some Grim Black speed paint thinned down a lot to make all the recesses darker. Then I started picking out the parts with color. 2 of the stripes got red paint, then white for the others. This took a lot of very careful painting, so I might try something different next time. Then for the blue, I used Imperial Navy for the center of each of these pads. Then for the surrounding trim, I used the same greens from the backpacks. Those are all of the colors blocked in. Now it's time for the star. The Fireflies come with a decal with these tiny little stars that's meant to go right in the center of these shoulders. I loaded up the pads with some Microsol and then transferred the decals into place. Finally, I have paint on everything. I used my hobby knife to dig out the silly putty from their necks, and I got to work gluing everything together. I'm not the biggest fan of sub-assemblies, but when it helps the paint go on easier and faster, I'm willing to do it. With everybody glued up, I used some Mithril Blade, which is a bright silver, and I did a few swipes with a dry brush to give their guns a little shine. And I also hit a little bit on their backpacks and helmets, just to make them look more battle damaged. I've got 16 Fireflies all painted up, a healthy number. I definitely learned a lot between doing my first batch and then doing the second batch, and I have plenty of things in the paint notes to think about when I'm working on my third batch. But this is plenty to be getting on with, and now I want to take a look at the other half of the USA faction, and that is the Walkers. I got 1 Pond Skater, all done, and I got 1 waiting in the wings. I really like the Pond Skater. It's such a funky little design. It's a World War II AT-ST. This chubby little walker is a treat, and I knew I wanted to put the US flag over the 50 cal shield. In the world of Konflict, the US is very zealous, so I wanted to be as obnoxious as possible with the patriotism. The Pond Skater kit is a hybrid of resin and metal. I took the parts and I gave them a soak in my ultrasonic cleaner full of LA's Totally Awesome to knock off any mold release agent. Then I got to work cleaning up the kit. The resin chunks had some pore spots to remove, and the feet had some miscast spots that I fixed up with my hobby knife. Then to fix some of the mold slippage, I used Tamiya basic putty on a toothpick to fill in the seam. Once that was dry, I could sand it to perfection. The metal was a little trickier to perfect. I used my rotary tool to grind down the metal, and I kept checking and rechecking the fit. The white metal is very soft, so I can bend the roll cage into position. Then for the 50 cal. This is actually a weapon option. The Pond Skater comes with 1 heavy machine gun for 80 points, but you can pay an additional 20 points to add a second heavy machine gun to the same pintle mount, which I feel like is worth the upgrade. 100 points is still pretty cheap. I used some green stuff to help me squish down the metal crew and the 50 cal into their positions, and then the medium machine gun got stuck to the bottom of the walker. For the heads, I decided not to go with the metal heads from the Pond Skater kit, and instead I stole some infantryman heads from the sprue of bolt action that I got at a mini swap years ago. I used some green stuff to rebuild their necks, and to add a little extra spice, I'm gonna put on some more shoulder pads I stole from the Fireflies box. Now that the build is done, I hit him with a white prime, then a base coat of Midnight Olive. I want this tank to still be in its factory olive drab. This one hasn't been repainted in camo yet. I mixed some leafy green into the Midnight Olive and I sprayed this on to brighten the top of my walker. Now to try and figure out how to make the green look good and not just like a green army man. I took a foam makeup egg and I tore off the top so it was smaller, and I started sponging on some more leafy green mixed into my Midnight Olive. This hit on the edges and details, brightening up the saturation, but I felt like my recesses were not properly shaded. So I took some Desolation Brown, thinned this down a lot, and then I put this all over the tank. It gave me nice harsh shadows that turned my green much more yellow. I redid my sponging over this new base coat, and now I feel like there's some good contrast. I used my airbrush to push the highlights on some of the bigger volumes, and now I would say the paint job is perfect. It's time for the decals. I threw some stars onto the knee pads. Then on the back of the leg, I put some military letters 6 and 9. Then I put some of the Konflict flag pendants on either side of the gunner spot. Then for some added detail, I took some playing cards from an aftermarket decal sheet I have and I put these on the leg. I did some sponging of green over these decals to weather them. Then before I hit the whole thing with battle damage, I want to finish the machine gun shield. I want to give this the same flag treatment I did on my first Pond Skater, base coating it in gray to cover the dark green, then a few coats of white paint, then carefully painting on red stripes. I then painted the blue part and then held my breath while placing so many little dots for the stars. With the flag looking pristine, I took a bit of sponge and I stamped on some white paint for paint chips. Then for paint chips everywhere, I took some necrotic flesh and I put this on all over the rest of the walker's armor. I also did a dry brushing of this color to soften some of the edges and connect some of the paint chips into longer scratches. I did another round of sponging with gunmetal paint. Finally, the tank's hull is all painted, and this second pond skater I kinda did in reverse. My original one I base coated just like the Firefly, so the crew was easy to paint. This time I'll have to do some base coats. I used a few coats of tan paint to base coat these, and I also threw this onto the bag strapped to the sides. I put necrotic flesh all over the bags and then glazed on some more midnight olive to make them darker where the straps were pinching and wrinkling the fabric. Then I gave these a wash with Desolation Brown. The bags ended up pretty dark, so I mixed some raw sienna ink and white ink together, and I sprayed on some highlights right in the middle of each bundle. And while I had this in my airbrush, I also did this to my original pond skater too. The bags are done, and now I can paint up the crew. I painted them just like I did the other Fireflies. They look a little funny poking out of this tank. This walker is really tiny, unlike our website, which is huge. On EonsOfBattle.com, we're all restocked on our excellent hobby goodies: Gamers Grass Tufts, Grey Tide Studio Bits for your Space Marines, Army Painter paints, brushes, basing cork, ultra thin and ultra thick super glue, and we've got terrain. It's the best way to support us doing what we do by getting a membership. Each month, members get a credit good for any one terrain pack we've ever made or the brand new one. This June, we have created the Ramshackle Bits pack. This set is full of improvised armor to enhance your vehicles, with massive treads, extra armor, rotating cannons, machine gun turrets, and little goblin gunners, including a bunch of little goblins to help keep all of this upgraded equipment running smoothly. Don't let the shoddy construction fool you, these bits are still plenty lethal, able to sling lead and crush foes under tread. This set also includes a series of basing bits to litter the wasteland of your battlefield. This set was designed by us and is available at EonsOfBattle.com. For the guns, I hit these with some gunmetal paint, then a wash of noble skin. Now everything is painted, I can hit the whole thing with a satin varnish in preparation for some more metallics and enamels. I brushed silver paint over the guns to brighten them up, and I finally glued down the canopy for good, trapping my little guy in there forever. Now for some enamels. I took black, dark umber, and orange to dirty up these tanks. I put this dark umber all over, then came back in with a makeup sponge soaked in mineral spirits to wipe it off the raised areas. Then while all of this was still damp, I dripped some orange rust and did the same thing, letting it pool only in the recesses. This adds a lovely bit of realism in these ridiculous chicken walkers. A little experiment I'm running on the second batch of shoulder pads. I skipped the acrylic wash, planning on doing some enamels here at the end. I think this worked much better and it was much easier than carefully painting in all the lines. I'll be doing it this way from now on. I glued these on, it was nice and easy for the top guy, but I completely forgot about the driver. It was a challenge threading the shoulder pad through the canopy, but eventually I made it work. That is the last touch on my little army. That is the second pond skater all done, and now that I've got a good number of these guys under my belt, they do feel a little different to paint than my usual Age of Sigmar or 40k. I wouldn't call these models realistic, but there is a certain realism to them. They are supposed to look like they're from the year 1947, and it's a different experience than what I'm used to. I'm liking how these guys are turning out, and the next step to get these guys playable are the bases. And Konflict bases are a little different than what I'm used to. Konflict has its own super flat bases. These give your minis a very low profile, which kind of helps them look more seamless on the battlefield. A little different from my usual cork towers, but I want to try and see how they feel. I glued on my guys with some super glue under their feet. There is no room for pinning here. The pond skaters also have similar bases. Since there's some wiggle woggle to their feet, I slid them on some sandpaper to make them nice and flat on the bottom so I could properly glue them down. Then I took some muddy texture paste and I smeared this all over the ground. I want something down, but I'll be covering a lot of this later. The texture paste didn't perfectly cover the plastic, so I made up a slurry of thinned down Brigadine Brown and I put this over the putty to darken it. Once that was dry, I did a little dry brushing of Tundra Taupe and then Dusty Skull over top to desaturate the ground a little, and I hit the little base rim with some Dryad bark. Now there's some basic earth under their feet. The real star of the show is going to be grass tufts. A lot of grass tufts. These are Gamers Grass Tufts, strong green extra large, dry green 6mm, the smaller green 4mm, and then everywhere else I could fit, I put some tiny beige 2mm. I've never used so many tufts before. I've now got a whole bunch of finished Konflict minis. There was a time, like 4 months ago, there was a random weekend where I just decided, Konflict 47, I'm doing it. I bought a box of Fireflies and one pond skater, and I got them put together, and I got some paint on there, majority of them done, and then they just kind of sat unfinished for a while. But now I've got more than double what I had almost done before. I have got a proper little collection. This right here, 2.5 squads of Fireflies and 2 pond skaters, is about 700 points of Konflict. The typical game is 1,500 points, so this is a third. I got a good amount of infantry, 2 vehicles, 2 small vehicles. Actually, I believe the US Pond Skater is the cheapest walker in the game. They get a lot bigger and a lot more powerful, and I can't wait to put together some of those suckers. There's something about Konflict 47 that kind of makes me weirdly nostalgic. Nostalgic for like older war games. Back in the day, like 6th edition 40k, armies and miniatures were just kind of physically smaller. Nowadays, a repulsor executioner for the Space Marines is about the same size as all of these miniatures. And this is a third of an army. And I can't wait to see what it looks like when it's a full army. I am excited to be getting into Konflict 47, and if you're a Konflict player, please let me know in the comments below, what should I be looking at for a proper US force? I really like the Pawn Skaters, but I've heard the Kodiak is great, I've heard I need a couple of machine gun teams, I've heard that the Line Breakers are excellent. Like, what do I need to get playing? Let me know, and thanks for watching.